Good evening. Welcome to the October 25th, 2021 study session of the Stillwater City Council. I will call this meeting to order and we will jump right in. First up tonight, we have an update from staff on proposed upgrades to the call water delivery system and the water treatment plant. Looks like Monty Carnes will lead us off tonight.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We told you last month that we'd be here today to give you an update on phasing and some costs. And let me get the PowerPoint pulled up. So today we'll do the update. Before the end of the year, we will be bringing contracts to you for what we call the confirmed improvements that we need at the plant now. And then sometime in the first quarter, we plan to come back with you, have discussions on the raw water storage options and some options going forward. So we talked about last month that we went through the project definition phase. We used a 50-year horizon. We confirmed that the improvements we need to make at the water treatment plant now will fit with any of the alternatives for the water treatment plant in the future. That was our main objective. You'll recall that some 18 months ago we identified we needed $77 million worth of improvements. Some of those were immediate needs, but we didn't want to spend that money until we knew for sure it was worth investing $77 million in an old asset. So we don't believe it is based on our numbers. We'll make that decision later. But the caustic feed system, the lime residual handling, the recovered water pump station, cathodic protection system on the raw water line, and the finished water pump station all are items we'd like to proceed with, we need to proceed with. And with the exception of the caustic feed system, we recoup all of those costs in whatever options we have in the water treatment plant. The caustic feed system is going to cost something less than $1 million, but it negates the need for having to redo the lime system. That's a $3 to $4 million expenditure. And we will recoup most of the caustic feed system in the new plant. There'll be parts we can reuse, tanks we can use, but there'll be some piping and other expenses that we will not recover. We need to do additional assessment on the raw water pipeline before we can develop alternatives. Again, further analysis on the raw water storage systems, and then of course the three alternatives for the treatment plant. The selection of the raw water storage option will greatly influence the raw water pipeline rehabilitation scenarios. Mainly the more water we have makes options viable or not viable when we shut down the plant or shut down the pipeline to do the rehab, and then also the timing of those. If the longer time we have for a particular system, obviously the quicker we can get it done and at less expense. If we have a short window, then we got to pay extra to have people get that work done. Those are all things we'll talk about later. Going forward, as I mentioned, we'll be coming to you with contracts to do the needed projects that we've confirmed. We'll continue the evaluation of the raw water storage system and further assessment on the pipeline. After that, we'll go back and look at the water treatment plant improvements in more depth, refine those costs, benefits and challenges on all of these, and of course look at the pipeline, rehab, replace it, and also the pump stations. Funding. We have known that we needed to do some improvements, so we have been setting money back in the water fund. That's one of the reasons those balances are so high, is we've been saving money. And so we have revenue there available. We have the American Rescue Plan that we've applied for $4 million of the $8 million that we're to get over 2 years. We believe between those two, we should have sufficient funds to continue moving forward. There's the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, of which we have some money left over from the 2040 project. We can't just automatically apply that, but those funds are there. We believe we can go back and get those funds as well. There's also other funds, other project funds that would be available. There's also the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act that we call WIFIA. Each of those two projects, funds come from the feds through those projects or those loan funds. They each have advantages and disadvantages, so we'll have to spend a lot of time working through that with Melissa and her people and the people at the state to figure out what the best options are for us. Of course, we have the option for revenue bonds to be paid from the rates. We have identified grant opportunities, the American Rescue Plan Build Back Better grant that John McClenny has visited with you about. We've made that application. That's 25 to 100 million. There's also the American Rescue Plan Act, and we've been in contact with our congressional officials for other funding opportunities. With that said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Monty. Councilors? Do you, we talked about the raw water options last week, and a question came up after that for me about whether DEQ standards would allow or disallow, or would they get in the way of any of those options?
Well, certainly they will have requirements, but we don't believe there's any challenges that couldn't be overcome with any of those at the present time, based on our current understanding.
Okay.
There'll also be the Water Resources Board will probably have a say in those as well.
Monty, when you're going through that process with the regulators, what's that, like at what point do we engage those folks? Is it
we have already
permitting,
engaged. We've already had conversations with DEQ about what we're doing and moving forward. We've had conversations with the folks that handle the loan funds, so they're aware. So we have begun those conversations. To date, everybody's been very supportive, particularly DEQ. One of our options is something that's new to the state in the treatment, and they were intrigued by it, saw some possibilities, but they raised some, well, we'd want to think about this and that, but we don't really have a concern about what they raised, and frankly agree with what their initial concerns were.
is some of that, sorry, it's such a large project. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around a little bit. It's so technically involved, I'm sure. But is that part of, are those pieces kind of when we get regulatory approval, or I don't know if it's permitting or things, is that part of the work that we're doing now? Is that incorporated into it so that we know what those checkpoints are and
Yes.
things like that? It seems like we'd want to kind of have that mapped out as we're mapping everything else out as well.
We do. And there will not be one permit that covers everything. There will be individual permits as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
What is the current bond and or debt load on from Water 2040? And will that have an impact on our ability to go borrow more?
I will have to get you that information.
Okay.
But obviously that's a concern, but we're paying those down as we go as well. So, and again, these will occur over a period of time. So we'll have some options to phase things in when we do those.
Okay.
I really do commend you for pursuing some of those bigger grant dollars that the federal government has in place. I know I've heard Mayor Joyce say several times, right, getting those kinds of federal dollars, those are our tax dollars, so they don't come back to our community, they're going to somebody else's community, so it's a great opportunity to capture those.
That's true, and again, we supply water not just to the citizens of Stillwater, but the surrounding areas as well, not only rural but one of the tribes gets raw water from us. We supply raw water to Morrison. So it's not just the city of Stillwater. It's quite a regional effort. And that is one of the things that does pique the interest and speaks well for us getting grants.
Yes.
Because we're serving a large range, or
Sure.
number of people. Thank you.
Speaking of those other folks, sorry, do they, I mean, I assume we have rates built with Morrison, with the tribes, with whoever buys the water from us. Is there any mechanism in those contracts that would allow for some additional funding to come through them as we look at how to
Well,
pay for all
of course,
this?
those are all things to be determined once we get to that point, but we think from a matter of equity that everyone should share in whatever those rates should be.
We'll look forward to those conversations.
Yes,
Thank you, Monty.
you bet.
All right. That takes us to item 3 on the agenda, which is a presentation on the time projects and the path forward from Becky Taylor.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Becky Taylor, Chief Civic Innovation Officer. At our May 24th study session, you may recall, our team presented the time projects to you for the first time. And based on your feedback and direction at that meeting, we embarked on a thorough community engagement phase over the last 6 weeks, and we received a lot of great community feedback from our residents that I am going to share with you this evening. This process of discussing our pressing needs, of openly talking through challenges involving revenue, and having these transparent conversations throughout the community is a key component of the time projects. And as a reminder, time stands for Together Investing in Municipal Excellence. And it speaks to what we want to do with these projects, as we each have a role to play in investing in our community and building a community of excellence. A little bit about our process. I want to discuss about our process, what we did in the last 6 weeks, then go into the feedback that we received, and then also just look at next steps and hopefully enter into a discussion to get some guidance from you at how to move forward. So we built a presentation with similar information that we shared with you at our May study session, and we used a platform called Mentimeter in all of the presentations and community meetings throughout the community. Mentimeter allowed people attending the meetings to provide feedback, and it's a great tool so that the loudest people in the room and the quietest people in the room can all offer feedback and participate in the discussion. So the information I'll share with you this evening is all from Mentimeter, and then also our online survey that we did as well. And just a reminder, the pressing needs that we currently have as a city that we discussed throughout the time projects, we need a new fire station, a new animal welfare facility, and then we need to continue investing in our roads. And so the presentation we did for the community described these projects in detail, but then it also asked our residents what needs they have identified as well, and we'll share with you those results as well. We held 5 community meetings, one in each of the 4 quadrants in Stillwater, and then one at OSU. You can see they were mostly in September, with the first one in August at the middle school, at Highland Park, Will Rogers, the junior high, and then, like I mentioned, at OSU. We worked with the Student Government Association at OSU to host that meeting, and it was the best attended of the 5 community meetings that we had. We received a lot of great feedback there. The city manager's office, Chief Estery, Captain Stevens, Monty Carnes, and Christy Kleck all attended these meetings, each one to answer any questions that our residents had. I'm really grateful for all the extra time that the staff spent going to these meetings. They all took place in the evenings, and they put a lot of great work into participating in these meetings around town. And also would like to mention just our gratitude to Stillwater Public Schools for allowing us to use their 4 facilities for these meetings. They were all great hosts, and the principals and other staff stayed late to host us on those evenings as well. In addition to our community meetings, we also had a lot of presentations over the last month or so. Chief Estery and I spoke at the Stillwater Frontier Rotary. We had a staff presentation in this room for any staff that wanted to hear. And at that time, we recorded it as well. And that's what we used later for our online presentation. We presented the time projects to Leadership Stillwater, to OLLI, our Osher Lifelong Learner Institute. We spoke to the Oak Creek community, and they also invited other neighbors to attend that meeting as well. We spoke to the Chamber of Business at lunch, Payne County Democrats, and then also, as I mentioned, an online presentation was live for 1 week to receive feedback. We still want to have that presentation up, but the survey option was for that week. And then also the mayor mentioned time projects during his State of the City address in August. So there were lots of talk about time projects over the last 6 weeks. In addition to the community meetings and the presentations, Dawn and her team did a great job of organizing the extensive outreach portion. Many city staff, we all took turns doing the TV 31 interviews and then also interviews on Team Radio and Stillwater Radio. We worked with OSU Communications so that students, staff, and faculty were aware of the time projects. Both the Ocali and Stillwater News Press did a lot of coverage for us. We had informational videos that ran on the Government Access Channel and then also on YouTube regularly. We placed ads in Stillwater News Press, Stillwater Radio, Team Radio, Suddenlink, AT&T Uverse. Our Speak Up Stillwater page is really well built out. I encourage you to look at it if you haven't yet had a chance. At the time this presentation was made, we had 189 total visits to that page. And then also just the portion on our website, so stillwater.org/time has a lot of really great information on each of these projects and information on geobonds and sales tax. And then many social media posts and events on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as handouts and a banner. So we well saturated our community with time projects. So the information that you'll see on the following slides we received during our community meetings and during the presentations. The 4 largest attended presentations, the word clouds that we received from those are what we included on these slides just to give you an idea of the words that were mentioned to describe Stillwater. So you can see some of the themes here. Most of them were very positive. So we have friendly, home, great place to live, community, lots of positive words. The negative words, if you look through those, most of them had to do with roads, potholes, infrastructure. So those were a few negative words that people used to describe Stillwater, but for the most part, very positive. When asked the biggest challenges facing Stillwater, the common themes were infrastructure, funding, roads, COVID. You can see at the OSU meeting, lack of diversity and food insecurity were mentioned along with parking and roads. But for the most part, pretty consistent with the biggest challenges that were mentioned. And if you want me to stay on any of these slides long enough for you to read more of them, just let me know. The chamber also mentioned chicken restaurants as a big challenge. And then we also asked, what streets do you feel need investment first? And you can see there's a popular one there, Duck Street. If you have driven down Duck Street recently, there has been some work started on Duck Street, but a more comprehensive repair to Duck Street will be funded through time projects. But other streets aren't really too surprising that were mentioned. College Gardens, Perkins will be addressed with ODOT. Husband, Western, Lakeview, and a few other familiar ones. And then a few that mention sidewalks, bike paths as well, so those should be also noted. My favorite answer that we didn't include on this one, but someone put the street in front of my house, so we can all agree that that's important. And in our presentation, we described in detail both general obligation bonds and sales tax. And so, and also what the result would be on the citizen or the property owner. So after that description, this question was asked, what is your preferred way to fund needed city projects? And you can see that 74% mentioned that both would be their preferred way. And then we asked with each question or each need that we had identified what the appetite was for voting on a bond or a sales tax to address these needs. And for the fire station number 2, 90% said yes, 6% maybe. So we have 96% there that have an appetite for this bond. Only 4% said no. So that's really positive. Same question asked for the animal welfare, 67% yes and 14% maybe. I see that 14% as really an opportunity just for us to do more education and as we move forward to just to really speak to that 14%. If we can get that 14% to say yes, that's 81% of yes and maybes there. And then for our transportation projects, 87% yes, along with our 6% maybes, that's 93% that were favorable. We also asked the question of those that were listening to rank the projects out of the 3, and it altered between the first and second being fire station number 2 and transportation. But as you can see from the pie charts we just discussed, all 3, if voted on that day, would have passed based on the feedback we received from those that were listening to the presentations. And we have our needs that absolutely need to be addressed, but we also want to keep building the list of future projects as opportunities arise to address them. And so we asked our community to dream big and to tell us what projects they would like to see for Stillwater's future. The major themes, as you can see on these word clouds, revolved around a convention center, a sports complex, especially if that includes pickleball courts. OSU and both the chamber mentioned Planned Parenthood as a common one, broadband, sidewalks, and you can look in there at the smaller words for some of the others. I think it would make every OSU student happy if we got a target, so that's something that is to be noted. Not surprising though. But there's some interesting ones. I'm happy to stay on this longer if you'd like me to. And then also, for those who cannot attend a community meeting or a presentation, we had an online presentation and a survey that asked the same questions. The answers received online echoed what we heard in the community presentations. So the way that people describe Stillwater online, friendly college town, nice community, beautiful campus. A few negative words thrown in there, no job opportunities, getting trashy, constricting. What do you see as the biggest challenges facing Stillwater? Chicken, roads, poverty, infrastructure, need better public spaces, rundown. What streets do you feel need investment first? Similar to the other answers, Duck Street was mentioned along with some of the others, bike paths, better bike infrastructure, University, Lakeview. And then when we asked our online, those who watched the online presentation to dream big, and it was similar also to the others, so revitalize downtown, downtown development, dedicated bike paths, a youth sports complex, restaurants. When we asked if they would support a bond proposal for a new fire station number 2, 96% of online responders were favorable to that. And when we asked about a bond proposal for a new animal welfare, 57% of our online responders were favorable. And then asked the same question about the half-cent sales tax for better roads, 79% were favorable. The feedback we received from the community, as I mentioned, is pretty favorable for moving forward with a successful bond and a sales tax initiative. We've discussed these pressing needs. We discussed at length why we need to generate additional revenue to tackle these needs. And so really we would like to see what you want to do moving forward. We would love to receive that direction. Staff is ready to carry this forward if you want us to do so, and it seems like our community is ready as well. Some options for a ballot date, there's February 8th, and if we picked that date, the resolution would need to be presented to you in a few weeks at a council meeting on November 15th. If we went with April 5th, which is also a good option, the resolution would be presented to you with the questions on January 10th. And based on community feedback and conversations that we had at these community meetings, it seemed like most were hoping for the proposition to be as 3 separate questions. So with question 1 being about a fire station, question 2, animal welfare, question 3, half-cent sales tax for transportation projects instead of lumping them together. And then also wanted to ask each of you if there's anything else based on the feedback we received from our residents that you would like to include on that as well, in addition to those items. And then a few other items I want to mention. We would love to develop a citizen action committee to help us move the time campaign forward to the election date once we receive some feedback. Several community members have already reached out and expressed interest in being involved in this effort. We will partner with OSU and hold voter registration campaigns, getting us towards that election date. We plan to do several pop-up city halls, with the first one being this Thursday at the Halloween Fest at Stillwater Medical Center. And then once passed, we hope that there'll be a council-appointed oversight committee for bond and half-cent sales tax spending, just to increase another layer of transparency that we can offer our residents. So based on all of that, we'd love to answer any questions. There's lots of staff here who are at all the meetings. I know would love to answer your questions. But really, if we would love to discuss the questions that you'd like to include, if there's any other projects, and then also if we're moving forward, which date would you like us to move forward with?
Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome.
Counselors, questions, comments, thoughts?
Well, I would say I was at several of the presentations, and I want to commend the city staff and Becky for just the effort and time they put into this, and the presentations were just fantastic. And so I'm very appreciative of the time you all put into this.
Thank you.
You did what Councilor Hawkins said. I guess my first thought is, I think what I like about this time project is that there's 3 very distinct projects that we are working on. And sometimes I think if we try and add more to it, then we set ourselves up for failure. So I'd really like for us to really focus on these 3, do it well, and have some success with that, and then get the ball rolling with other projects as we see fit. That's my input.
My only question would be that if we do decide to go forward with the February 8th ballot, there were several things that were talked about implementing as far as a citizen committee on oversight for expenditures, further correspondence with the students, student government liaison, or student government association at OSU. If we go with a February 8th ballot, does that give us enough time to implement those things? I mean, you guys have put a lot of time and effort into this thus far. Do you have enough gas?
We can, yes. I mean, obviously, the April would give us more time to do those.
Yeah.
So I want to clarify, the oversight committee would be once it is passed.
Sure.
So if that's passed, then that committee is developed. The Citizen Action Committee would be either way. We would get that started right away. Already have a great list built out, and continue to add people as those who want to join let us know. We already have a few voter registration campaigns scheduled with OSU. So tomorrow, Dawn and I are speaking at a class at OSU, and we'll address voter registration. So that's going to be something that we do, whether or not it even makes it on a ballot in February or April, because it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, the Stillwater Medical Center Halloween Fest is already this Thursday. So, so yes, it moves us faster,
Mm-hmm.
but it's doable.
Sure.
I assume everybody believes that a bond for the fire station is going to pass with a 90% yes? That we think?
I would like to assume
I'd like to
that.
assume that
Yes.
too.
I think that's not going to happen. I mean, I think this, to echo everything, I mean, this project so far has been great. What we've put up and the conversations it's generated have been great, but I mean, 120 some responses is not a scientific poll, right? And so I think what we've heard from folks has been good, and I think there is strong support, and they understand the need, especially for the fire station. Clearly, a little bit less so on the animal welfare side, and everybody thinks we need to fix the roads. But I am, I guess, under no illusions that there will not be a strong counter argument to be made for some folks here. I guess my question around timing, these projects all certainly need to be done, and we have to pay for them. So, I mean, at some point, we just have to ask people if they agree that they need to be done and that this is the best way to fund. From a timing perspective, I wonder, I think in the past with bonds, sometimes there's been sort of what you alluded to, Elaine, a little bit too much trying to happen at once. Is there any value in sort of splitting them up? Maybe putting the revenue bonds on the February election and the sales tax bond on an April election, and kind of giving people a little bit more time to look at them and not have, maybe ballot fatigue of having too much. We'll also have the mayoral election will be on February 2nd. I think the school board will have an election on one of those dates. I can't remember which one. Maybe both, honestly. I think they still do it backwards, right? Do they still do, if they have more than 2 people sign up, they do a primary on the 1st. They would have a primary in February, and if they don't have more than 2 people sign up, they just would have a general in April. So I guess my question is just around, do we want to sort of spread them out a little bit to give people a little bit more time to spend, researching these issues and not have everything piled on one ballot, or not? I don't know.
I know. I hear what you're saying, but the other part of me says we are always so concerned about voter turnout. They would actually have things to vote on that are important to them on one, to me, that's important too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could see too, if you split them out, right? It is so challenging to get folks to come out and participate in local elections and local voting, that if you split them out, the chances of getting them to come back out maybe for that second one might be challenging. I also do wonder if there has been a lot of conversation and kind of saturation and different social media platforms and things like that, if it would benefit to keep the conversation to move towards the February date, just because we've been talking about it, right? It's kind of more fresh in people's minds. But I also feel like the mayor said, we've talked about it a lot, but have we reached everybody that we really need to reach in order to have a successful community conversation? And I guess it's just hard. We're in a weird time for participation, I think, from a public perspective. We don't have a lot of folks some people aren't comfortable yet coming out to kind of those gatherings. They're tired. We're coming off a period from the pandemic where everybody's just a little tired in general. So going out and doing extra meetings and learning more it's hard. So I'm not sure if do we give the community more time because of that, or is it better to keep the momentum? Do we have enough momentum to say keep it going?
Well, we definitely have an election scheduled for February 8th or whatever that is. It the 8th?
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't put them on that one, then we're splitting them up, right? We're going to ask people to come to 2 elections. I don't know. I think my approach or my thoughts on putting a bond issue up. It's been 20 years since the city has passed a bond issue. We have to pass one. We really, really need to pass one because the funding, we need the funding, and I don't, whatever we decide to do, we have to sell it. It has to be passed if we put it on the ballot. And so, at the very least, the fire station, in my opinion, should be on that first ballot, because I think that's the one that's clearly the most I mean, that is clearly something the community needs. Everyone can understand why Fire Station number 2 needs to be replaced. Chief Essery's video on the subject is fantastic, if you haven't seen it.
It's on Speak Up Stillwater.
It's on Speak Up Stillwater. It's on the website as well. And so at the very least, that should be on there. I don't know if, I don't know. I mean, if there are at least four, if not 5, maybe 6 different issues to be voted on on that same ballot, do we risk, I don't know, getting that same sense of, well, we're trying to push everything through? Because that was the comments from the last bond issue we heard a lot, which was, was sort of like just lumped everything together and threw it in there. And
What I appreciate about the information on this bond and then what's going to be is that it's clear, it's succinct, it's easy to understand. If we decide to do the February, it's going to provide opportunities for dialogue because it's going to get their attention. And in my mind, that's important. Whether it's negative or whether it's positive, it at least spars conversation and gets that going. And so that's important. And I think we have our information out there. We're not deciding a date and then saying, oh, now let's get the information together. We've started that process. You guys have that information. I think we do. I mean, I understand about fatigue, but I also want to give the community a chance to say, you know what, we have a chance to have our voice heard. And these 3 projects are very important. The mayoral election is important. School board is important. This is your community. So I think it's important to give them an opportunity to vote at one time.
I agree with the mayor, though, that our lack of a bond in our community, when you look at because of the way we're funded as municipalities in Oklahoma, truly the communities that are thriving and doing the best are the ones that have been able and successful at passing these bond issues and then have kind of that continual opportunity to invest in themselves. And we haven't, we're not giving ourselves that chance right now without a bond issue. And I know it's right, it's an expense and it's hard not to look at it that way, but truly these projects are an opportunity to invest in our community. And what better time with some of the other funding pieces that could come into play with the private sector looking to invest with us on different projects. It's a really great time for the community to say, we are going to invest in us too.
Well, I think from the conversation, it's clear that we should have resolutions ready for the November 15th meeting. I mean, we're not making a decision on this tonight, but they should both be for all 3 of the ballot questions. We should have those available for us at February 15th, I guess, at the latest, so that we can decide at that meeting whether we want to put them all on or if we want to defer one of them to later, we can. But yeah, they should all be ready to go.
For both dates.
I mean, it's
With the assumption that they'll be on the February 8th.
it'll be the same resolution. It would just be
Yeah.
change the date,
the date.
right?
So
So
have
as long
them
as they're all
ready
ready to
for that
go,
meeting.
so that if
Okay.
we want to put them all in February, we can. And if not, we'll just change the dates and push them. But I think there should be some additional discussion between now and that meeting
I agree.
to talk to folks and see
Yep.
if just us as counselors, if you hear feedback from folks who think they should be split up or they should be together or they should be structured in some other way.
Is that something we can put on the social media and is that?
We can continue with some of the questions.
Or questionnaire or survey or
Yep.
something that
Yep.
would
Sure we
allow some
can.
feedback? Okay,
Flash vote.
okay,
With specifically those questions.
okay,
Okay.
okay. Just to get something out
So
there.
we'll
and-
do that prior to that November 15th meeting and come back with those results and also a draft or the resolutions.
Great.
Somebody will have to remind me what the required margin is to pass these. Are these 60% on the bonds? Or all of them are just flat majority? It's just school bonds that require 60%, is that?
Yes, school districts require
Okay.
supermajority. It's quite funny.
You sound like someone who's worked in the school
Someone
before.
who's done it before.
I also think it lends itself to the transparency piece that we are talking about 3 different questions and we're not trying to lump
Right.
things in together. I think that's one of the comments I've heard from people is that they do want to see this in three distinct questions.
Well, and that's a really good point too, Councilor Hawkins, is that while I think we can sit up here and unanimously say that we want to to pass a bond. I think that this is something that is almost at this point going to be required for our city to move forward and to continue the economic development pieces that we're putting into place right now. But we also want a good representation of what our voters have to
Right.
say. And I think that the February 8th election is probably just assuming that that's going to be a better turnout than the April election. So, with that in mind, as much as we want a bond issue to pass, it's also important that we get a good representation of what our voters want. So I think that the February 8th election is probably the better opportunity to do that, just looking historically. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Is before Becky's other question was whether there was anything else you wanted on there. I think, Elaine, you mentioned that these three would probably be the way to keep it. Anybody else want to
Unless you can
propose
put a
another
target on the?
You want to put a
on the
target
ballot.
on the bond?
I will say, I wish that some of the community involvement, I know we asked the question, I just don't know that anything just rose specifically to the top and enough for us to develop an actual bond question around it. I would have loved to have seen even a small kind of quality of life project or something come into this issue, but I also feel like because we haven't had a bond issue in so long, sticking to these three questions, really defining the community need for these things, sticking to those basics is probably a wiser decision.
I would also say that these road projects will be
Yeah.
tremendous improvements in
Yes.
quality of life.
I hope
We can
so.
get
I
those.
think, that was one of the other things I was going to mention. I really hope that as we look at these road projects, we consider them as quality of life improvements, not just a smoother road, but the sidewalks and other improvements that we have been talking to folks about for a while, that can be included, and it kind of becomes a quality of life opportunity, I think, too. So,
Yep.
So the other question about that, specifically about the transportation, I mean, I know with the bonds, we've got to identify a very specific infrastructure project, the fire station, the animal welfare building, those are easy. With the sales tax increase, we don't necessarily have that same limitation, although we want, and we have identified projects. I don't know, within the question itself on the ballot, will there be specific street projects that are named? Is Duck Street going to be on that list of this is what's going to, if you say vote yes on this, we will fix Duck Street. Is that going to be part of a very specific list, or how's that plan? What's the plan for that?
I imagine it'll be set up like our other half-cent sales tax, but Norman, do you have a?
Yeah, there will be a specific list of what we're going to do, what we're going to do, and that's one of the reasons that we think it's important for a citizen oversight committee is to see to it that we do exactly what we say we're going to do. But as far as council has given us direction and is included in the plans going forward for alternative transportation as well.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at a street, we're also looking at the sidewalks. We're looking at what's under the pavement, so we don't have to go back and cut it up later. It is a comprehensive repair project, not just Band-Aids.
Yeah.
And I would say, I know comments I heard as we were talking about road projects is just the idea of making sure that some of these, I know there's some needs that we look at first and we have priorities, but looking at something where a lot of people see that what we have done, so there's kind of that support because we're doing something that affects a lot of people in terms of the roads. So.
If I can make a couple of comments. Yes, that half cent could go for more than just what we call pavement management. It could do enhancements. We question how much of the pavement management was really intended to do active transportation. So we try to keep faith with the public for that, but clearly it would be good if that additional half cent sales tax could go towards some active transportation. I mean, just today I had a discussion about well, we don't really have the funding to do that needed project. So, and it was a sidewalk project, so that would certainly give us more flexibility. We do like the idea of a citizens committee helping us decide that, where those should go. If you do decide to make a list, I think that was done early on, maybe with the first half-cent sales tax, and it had a sunset, and it had a list of projects that were going to be done. But then it had the caveat that if we run out of money, we're not obligated to do them. And one of those projects wasn't funded, and then it fell to a lower priority. So we hear from people from time to time, well, you said you were going to do that project. But then, legally we didn't have to, but you still have, that's the danger you have if you specify we will do these projects.
Well, do you see the wording on this half-cent sales tax basically being the same as the existing half-cent?
No, I think, we have that tied down a little tighter, and now that has a sunset clause in it. But I would think we want to be a little looser with not looser, but more broad based on what we can use the funds for. And certainly if there's some mechanism on to build confidence about which projects are done, I think we need to have language like that. There are no shortages of where we can spend the money for roads. We just need to spend them wisely and for projects that benefit everyone. And that comes from public input. So that's certainly, and that's kind of the nice thing about the pavement management is we have a scientific system to tell us where to spend that money. But when you're talking improvements and quality of life things, that really has to come from somewhere other than staff, in my view.
So the existing half-cent is more specifically defined for maintenance and pavement management and just upkeep. This one we would word to be more to allow it to be used for road expansion or new roads or all still transportation road-related projects, but not just maintaining existing roads.
That's correct. And now, let's be clear, the existing half-cent we have used to pay engineering for Perkins Road, and we've used that on the arterial. So we do have some flexibility to do that. But as I interpret it, it was mainly intended for pavement management.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just thinking of Duck Street. We have various plans that have been looked at, and when we look at that area, it's in the form-based code and things like that about improving that road beyond just the smoothness of the drive.
Yes.
And having it become, more of a complete street, I guess would be the way to talk about it. So having the opportunity, perhaps, as we're looking at a Duck Street, to do something that if we did it that way, where it was that complete street concept, it's really building into the fabric of the public realm as opposed to just managing the pavement.
Yeah, we just need the wording on this actual ballot issue to
Sure.
be clear and for people to understand what's those are the questions. What is this actually going to pay for? What else could you use it on if you decide to use it somewhere else? And we need to be very clear about what we're allowed, where this money would actually be used.
And certainly in that, one thought would be a certain percentage would be spent on this and another percentage or broad ranges or something like that. So the public would have some idea that, well, it's not going to all be spent on this area and not on another area.
And I think, personally, I understand how it could be challenging to define projects, but I also think it's kind of important for people to understand what a priority list of projects, just so that they have some I know we have maps and we've been presented maps. I know the time presentation also had a lot of highlighted areas of where project needs are, but I don't know, like, I don't recall, are those like 10-year time horizon? I mean, I don't know, in that slide of the time presentation, was that these are projects that need to get done in the next 10 years, and were they all just pavement management projects, or?
Some of those were pavement management, but most of those were for capacity improvements or Doug Street or those types of things.
Because there's some widenings, right? I mean, we have
Some
other
widening,
things besides.
certainly Western.
Right.
Western was a widening, that'd be an improvement. Lakeview was a widening and would be an improvement. And in that discussion, I mean, we can put together whatever data we think is appropriate. We can add traffic counts. We can say what we think cross sections should look like. We can talk about where right-of-way is sufficient to include active transportation, or where we can put those, or how much or how wide those could be. We can certainly develop those types of things, and we'd be happy to.
I don't know, kind of, is it just a wording in the bond question, or does it need to be a more specific? I guess I'm not really sure. And some of the ones that I've researched in other communities, they've defined specific projects, but it also wasn't a sale. The ones that I looked at were more,
If it's a bond, it has to be
Has to
defined.
be.
Right.
If it's a sales tax, it
Correct.
doesn't necessarily have to be defined in the question. And, you know, like Monty sort of mentioned, I mean, it's not necessarily helpful for the community as a whole to try to define exactly what those
Right.
streets, I mean, there's, stuff changes. Some other priority can pop up, and you need some flexibility there if we're talking about a long-term sales tax to improve transportation. I just think, so I don't know that it necessarily needs to be in the question itself. I think the question needs to be worded as such. I don't know if we want to build the Citizen Oversight Committee into the question, or if that's like a resolution that passes alongside it. I mean, there's some questions here that we're going to have to figure out before we get to vote on this thing about how exactly it gets worded. With the Citizen Oversight Committee, there's a list of projects, but I think to get, for people to go to a ballot box and say, yes, I'm willing to pay a half cent more in sales tax, they need to know this thing's going to get fixed, this thing's going to get fixed, this, we don't have to define them all, but we need to give them
Certainly.
a good, solid list of stuff that they can expect will happen. I mean, not, the day after the election necessarily, but at some point. I mean, because there are issues that we know this money will go to fund over the next several years, Duck being one of them, Western, potentially Sanger and 19th, or, the other school-related transportation issues, or, the roads on that list that get highlighted.
Or is there a way to kind of say, we expect it to generate kind of this amount annually, and this would pay for 5 of
I think
this
that's
kind
I
of
think
project, right?
That's a good way to word
Or,
things. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a way to generally define it, it would pay for
Right.
5 repavings of this, for example, 5 of these, or 2, widening projects, like generally, and, pavement management over so many lane miles. I mean, I don't know exactly how we define that in a way
Sure.
that's accessible for folks to understand, but maybe some kind of like level of effort that could be generated from that
Well-
kind of funding.
Certainly, and in our pavement management, we have a rolling 5-year plan. And 5 years out, we're not sure about. 2 and 3 years out, we're a little more sensitive. So we can certainly generate documents such as that, as we could do so many widenings, we could do so many of this type of things, and certainly.
Maybe that kind of
that
shows some
would be-
accountability.
That'd be a
or-
document we could develop.
And then
Yeah.
you're not maybe saying specifically like exactly what road, but just kind of generally you could
General.
expect these kinds of improvements
Sure.
on a.
Well, I think you still want to, there's probably 2 or 3 projects at least that we could say for sure, we know
This
this is
road.
going to have to happen, this is going to get
Yeah.
done. And then over the life of this, these are the additional things that would get.
That could get.
And, and of course, that's kind of where the citizens committees come in.
Exactly.
Is to help us prioritize which one of those you're going
Yes.
to do
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
It is hard, Monty, you're so often coming in and reminding us that it takes so long to do this, right? We have to engineer it, then we have to build it. It takes a lot longer, and I think than people realize to do some of this work. So people's maybe tracking of how dollars are spent and what money has gone to what projects, it's hard for people to kind of recognize where all that's been. So maybe just redefining that a little bit, reminding them this is inclusive of these things, and maybe that 5-year horizon is a good one to kind of stick to.
I think so. And again, when you have the dedicated source of funds, it's much easier really just to set up a system where you're rolling and you're moving forward. You can gear up with your design community, your contractor community, and you know roughly what you're going to have coming along. And it just almost becomes an assembly line and lets us shorten the time, as opposed to when we're taking it out of the general fund and we're having to compete for those funds. And, we were moving forward, and then we have a pandemic or funds go down, and we just basically stopped, and we've lost at least 2 years. So those, that, to me, that's the beauty. And if you can tie the source of revenue to the actual use, you really have better accountability, and you can also move a lot faster. Enough preaching to the choir.
Well, I think we have, go ahead.
I'd also say we need a little bit of flexibility. 2 years ago, we had no clue about 300 or 400 houses going in on Southwestern Street.
Sure.
And, already concern has been raised about that. And so you're talking about a considerable sum of money just to do that.
Yeah.
So we do need some flexibility and to be agile in getting some of those things done.
Well, it sounds like we have some work to do before these resolutions are ready on November 15th, but I have every faith in the world that staff members here will be able to put those things together so that they come, we have the best opportunity we can to provide funding for projects that are sorely needed in the community. So, Becky, do you need anything else from us?
I don't think so.
Thank you so much. Thank you to your team and to Dawn and to everybody that's been working on publicity around that. I know, people want to make sure that they have input. They want us to be responding to what citizens have to say, and they want us to listen, and we're certainly willing to do that. I hope that people will take the opportunities that they have to continue to contribute their input. We need to know what the community wants, and the only way we know that is if people show up and speak up. So there's still opportunity to give us feedback and let us know what you think, but hopefully we can get some revenue passed here in the next few months so that we can provide these projects for the community. Anything further, councilors? Does anyone have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Before we do that, before we vote on the motion to adjourn, I was going to ask Norman to let us know, there was a comment about Duck getting some work done currently, which is super exciting.
It is, and we started on that a week ago, I believe. Excuse me. And also on East McElroy, some panels being removed and replaced, and everybody is concerned about what are you going to do towards the end of this week. Well, they will shut down activity on every street in Stillwater that we're working on. Those lanes that can be open will be open, and it will remain that way through the weekend so that walk around and homecoming can be successfully completed without a lot of tie-ups in traffic. So,
Well, that's good to know. It's always exciting to see progress. Of course, everybody wants us to work on the street until we're working on a street and it gets in their way.
Yeah.
So it's, but those roads will be open for homecoming and for walk around. Please be safe this week with walk around, with homecoming. Very exciting to have all these events back. We hope people will enjoy them and enjoy them safely. All right, we have a motion and a second on the table to adjourn the city council meeting. Are we going to vote? Yes. Let's vote. With a vote of 5-0, Stillwater City Council is now adjourned. Thank you all.